Whoa, did I start, or did you start the recording?
Yeah, I started the recording. Just.
Oh, okay, hold on. So I can't see myself.
Sorry about the confusion this morning, everybody. I feel quite bad that I sent a flurry of emails, but I was going through my inbox and then I just started at the bottom and didn't see that there were a couple of messages ahead of it. So sorry about that.
No problem.
The chaos originated with myself in terms of trying to push out meeting times and that. So my apologies.
No problem.
And thanks to everyone. So it's good to have everyone around. Nehemiah is joining us. I see him on.
Am I dark? Just... I need like more
black,
light.
Huli. You're too black.
Is the camera being racist towards me?
A little bit.
I don't answer that question. Are you dark?
Where's your desk lamp? You need some lighting.
I've got a lamp,
camera.
yeah,
You need makeup and lighting. Come on,
I
guys.
don't makeup and lighting. Let me see what I can do here. But I don't understand. Let's see. Maybe if I do this with the camera and make
You're
it
good. Don't worry
focus.
about it.
There we go. That's there we go. It has to do its white balancing thing. Because
Yeah. But we're not sitting next to each other, so it can't be the camera that's racist. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's an interesting point that there's that Netflix documentary. Have you seen the Netflix documentary?
Yeah. What's it called again?
Yeah, but in terms of how they set up their databases.
Yeah.
The bias. It's something about bias.
Coded bias.
Yes.
Coded bias. Yeah. It's actually something really, I mean, just in that first 10 minutes when she's doing the facial recognition thing, it doesn't see her. And then she puts on this white mask and it's like, face,
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's really scary. But it's also, I mean, it's technology. I mean, Kodak and Fuji and all the sort of camera technology places, the film that was developed for taking photographs was actually chemically suited towards, recognizing lighter forms or something like that. So it's in film, you'd have to make adjustments to your camera to have proper exposure for darker skins.
No, I mean, I'm sure, and maybe that's a good point for us to start, is this question of inherent bias in the system. I mean, I would imagine that the early developers were probably the Europeans or Americans that designed this technology, and they used themselves as samples, and so they adjusted their tech until they were clear, and then they ran with it, and then it took over, and then eventually people said, but okay, but you don't represent everyone on the planet, but by that time that technology is so ingrained, it's difficult to then compete with it, and then you have to make adjustments and that kind of stuff, so
yeah,
it's it's that kind of bias that we don't often see in the system, and particularly white people are not aware of that, but black people are very aware of it, so when you go for an ID photograph or something like that, just mundane, usual, standard things, where suddenly exceptions have to be made to accommodate, then you start, I think that's so it's not a microaggression per se, but it's a micro, what would one call it, a micro detail that just affirms to you that you're not the standard by which the system has been designed,
Yeah.
I don't, there's something about that. I don't know how many of us remember getting, your ID and your passport photos, and you'd have to stand in front of a white board, and someone would be moving lights and making sure that the lights are okay. I remember that. And then they'd also say you can't wear certain clothing, like, can't wear dark clothes or something like that.
Yeah.
I remember running through a mall looking for someone to change shirts with because I happened to be wearing the wrong color shirt for them to take a photograph with me. They said, no, it's going to affect the light coming. I was like, oh, geez, guys. But you talk about that sort of microaggression thing. I think it is a microaggression, in some ways. There's the microaggressions of obviously it's changed now. The microaggressions of having to find a Band-Aid that doesn't stick out on your hand like a sore thumb, excuse the pun, because it's not your flesh color, you know? And now you're starting to see a lot more variety. You get transparent ones, you get whatever. It's the same as like realizing that fashion as we know it, and the clothes and the sizes that we have are all based on military perfection, you know, that military body. And then you go into a store and try and buy clothes and you realize actually it's not made for me because it's a standard. There's a standard. That's why I hate shopping for clothes on my own.
Do you need a moment there, Vuli?
I needed a moment, sorry. Nehemiah, you're not letting us see you.
Oh, hear you.
Nehemiah, are you with us?
In spirit?
Yes, my internet is a bit slow today, and I had the kettle on to make tea, so I want to come and sit down when everything is like in order. So I will be with you shortly. I'm just making a cup of coffee. But my setup is in a way that my table is right at the intersection of my lounge and my kitchen, so I can see and engage and do everything while I'm here. So excellent. I am present. I'm just making coffee quickly.
Fantastic, Nehemiah. Good to have you. So I mean, I'm wondering whether we should also reflect on what's happening in South Africa at the moment, whether there's whether the race element, in the sense of different, you know, I've been thinking about this thing about difference, where, you know, so a lot of people are saying that there's an ethnic thing, an ethnic element to this, and not saying it, but obviously in terms of Zulu culture, as if Zulu culture is this homogenous sort of one thing, and everyone who's Zulu suddenly gets a WhatsApp in the morning that kind of says go off and riot. You know, I mean, I'm not sure. And I think the same mechanisms work as with race. There's this othering, and suddenly the Zulu nation, you know, becomes capable of doing a whole bunch of stuff that we would not normally think of an individual being able to do. I don't know. Sorry, will you?
I just put in the chat, but
we are going to get to that, I'm sure. Yes,
we are going to get to that.
We are kind of just reflecting on what the state of the nation is at the moment.
Exactly.
I think is where Gary was taking this. You know, Gary, I think it's got to do with kinship. I've been thinking about this a lot in my own reflection about this concept of racialization. When does othering happen? And when does sameness happen? When are you recognizing loyalty worthy of support, you see, and a sort of sense of belonging, that this is a cause worth championing for you? And I think it's got to do with kinship. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around that, what my understanding of kinship is, because it's been problematic in my own life, where I've been classified as colored. So I think, yes, I am colored because I don't, I'm not able to speak Xhosa or Zulu. So I'm not able to even culturally fit in with other Black people in this country, but I'm not white either. So I'm a sort of coconut, as they've called me. So I've started wondering, so then what is my kin? And this is where I've reflected on my own practice as a musician, where I said I actually then started to find a home within the music, amongst other bohemian musos like myself, where we didn't have this core focus on a race so much, but it had influenced me to say that this is a worthwhile thing for me to reject my community for, because I'm gaining something here, and I recognize this could be my kin. So when you say, why do people respond in the way that they do, I'm just sort of paraphrasing what you were prodding. Is it that folks get this SMS to say, because you're a Zulu, you've got to go and support the Zulu cause right now? I think part of it is, yes, somehow it's a remnant of the colonial legacy, where this has sort of been something we find difficult to speak about or to explain, because it starts to speak about then a mob mentality, which is in itself very, very racist construct also. But my personal opinion is that there's this thing about loyalty somehow, about there's this in us which is the same, and therefore, because if one of us goes down, all of us goes down. So we have to support our comrade, and the ANC government especially, and a lot of Pan-Africanists sort of use this rhetoric about comrade, you see, and it's infiltrated itself also into ethnic tribal sects, which wasn't really functioning off of that militaristic paradigm, but it has been again a remnant of how we've been grouped by our colonizers and the apartheid regime, who just sought to segregate.
Mm. Mm.
I wonder if I could intersect a little on that what Glenn is talking about. And right here, I want to draw on a new card that as I've been engaging in these conversations, I've realized a very important thing that we might overlook many times when we think about race, right? Or we think about structures societally that are created by race or that persist in our society. When we start to say that we need to think, because I've been grappling with the issue of how do we think complexly about race, right? Where does this notion of thinking complexly about a very binary issue, right? How do we think complexly about an issue that presents itself as sort of this very binary issue where there is a distinctive right and a wrong party based on a historical account? And how do we reconcile that in a post-racial society, right? Post-racial society, as we would like to call the society that we are in currently, how do we reconcile all of that and still say that we are thinking critically about it? And then one thing that sticks out to me is that we're going to have to concede that there's an element of multiple truths that we are dealing with, right? We are dealing with multiple aspects or multiple stories that are intersecting, that are engaging here, that lends to different interpretations of how we each intersect race, right? And I think this is kind of something that could be one of those things that is very peculiar and unique to our context in South Africa. Glenn highlighted that now about kinship, race, kinship, and culture, right? And we find that as someone who was identified from birth as being a part of the colored community. My parents, we grew up in colored communities and mixed communities, but never finding kinship in those communities. Me specifically, I had a difficult time assimilating to kinship in those communities because I was other. Right? If it wasn't at the stage where my skin was too dark, it was another thing of my language isn't specific to the culture. So I have a horrible speech impediment where I can't say the R sound, and it renders me to fumble when I speak. And so I've code switched. Right? I have put an R, I've rounded my R's to be able to come into a space and speak more eloquently. And I am saying that to speak more eloquently and more understandably. And so that thing has caused me also to be alienated in some of my circles because I don't assimilate that form of that is associated to colored. And also within this concept of kinship, there's also the violence that comes around colored bodies and the black body, colored body and the black body. Like we are all in solidarity until a specific point, because at some point in time, you are going to be reminded by your black comrades that you are a product of rape. You have no stake here. You are just as a part of the colonizer. We are the true descendants of here. I saw a debate, a South African debate that they were having on race, and it got really heated because there was this speaker, this black speaker who was very prolific in her understanding of race, but when it came to colored people, she just switched off. And there was a guy who wasn't a part of the conversation who was in the audience, who identified as colored, but part of the First Nation people, who it caused this eruption in him where he got up and he was like, why won't you recognize us? We are as much as part of this, and blah, 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 blah. And so when you look at those interactions and at those systems that are in place, you do realize that there is this issue of kinship that is happening, that the Zulu nation is calling upon the Zulu nation, that a Zulu person is being taken down, and we must all stand together, right, to prevent this, because we can't allow this. But then there's also a truth behind that, right? We might say that it's kinship that's happening, but then there's also a truth that when you look at the legal structure of what had transpired, that the law is not equally applied. I don't agree with what Jacob Zuma did. In fact, I think the prosecution of Jacob Zuma is in alignment with the law. However, how the law has been applied to different people who've been doing the exact same thing is quite different. And when you look at the political kind of landscape of South Africa and how the ANC is split up into tribes within itself, you know, you start to ask questions, is this a political attack on him, or is this really about this? Because we have a current sitting minister of cabinet whose son has embezzled millions of rands in PPE money and things, but the law isn't applied the same way. He wasn't asked to step, this person holds office. We didn't demand him step down. We didn't demand him be prosecuted for that crime, right? So there's definitely these contestations that there is multiple truths happening here. And so how do we reconcile all of this, right? And how do we start to prosecute? Because then the same argument can be true that de Klerk is still walking free in South Africa, who was a war tyrant, right? If you look in terms of he was given a Nobel Peace Prize, right? After pressures to succumb a state that was unlawful, after pressure, he didn't wake up and have a change of heart. There was external pressures that was pursuing him to stop what he was doing. Right? It was no longer a favorable practice for the country. And based on that, they took the decision to sit together and to call an end to apartheid. And so now when we look at all of these things, we now start to realize, but where is the starting point? Where then can this conversation get started, right? And I think really when we talk about thinking complexly about race, that's really the conundrums that we are going to be able to get into. Because I saw a headline this morning about 216 people being arrested and about in the teens being dead after the protests, right? And I was shocked. I was like, why don't I know about this? Why isn't this being reported? What is happening? Is there a cultural war happening in South Africa? You know, so I guess I've been speaking like I've been offloading a lot, but I've been sitting with this, right, this weekend, and I've been trying to make sense of it. So where is the right and where is the wrong? And how do we justify the right and the wrong when in certain instances we say that it was for the greater good, and in others that all of a sudden doesn't apply, right? Because seemingly corruption never existed prior to 94 in South Africa. Corruption never existed prior to 94, and everything was just dandy prior to 94, right? The Oppenheimers didn't exist prior to 94. Anglo-Sax wasn't a part of South Africa prior to 94. The Gupta family was not in the works with South Africa prior to 94. We hear all of these things, and we have to stop and we have to question, like, where's this all coming from? And I think what was interesting for me that I heard a talk once where they were talking about identities and the power of story, histories, identities, and the power of stories. And I think we're having challenges with grappling with all of these issues because we do not understand our history. We do not know our history. We romanticize apartheid as a time where at least I could buy 2 loaves of bread, a month's worth of groceries with 2 shillings. And now I hardly can get by with 1,000 rand a month. Right? We romanticize this period because we don't know the truth. We don't know the truth, and the people who are telling us this story are incapable of critically engaging with that time because of their trauma and their oppression, right, that they were under during that time. And so I think really a lot of that conversation is going to have to be started there. We're going to have to reconcile with that, because whether you owned slaves or you didn't own slaves, whether your family was for apartheid or against apartheid, whether you were taught not to see race or not see race, the clear implication in society is there's an inheritance. There's an inheritance from the system, and you are benefiting from that inheritance. And so how do we start to talk about this? Why does the inheritance not apply to being Black? Right? Because there's an inheritance. Similarly to how Summerstrand is predominantly white, right? We have Motherwell that's predominantly Black, and that is the inheritance of a system. And so when are we going to confront that issue? Because just final point, I promise, and then I will be done with my tirade, because this is really a bashing. This is a bashing, and I don't want to be like if so any buts about it. It became apparent to me this weekend, or prior to this weekend, because I've been thinking a lot about these issues, and it became apparent to me that someone who says that they don't see color, or they don't see the world in color, or that says that racism is really not a thing in today's society. Being Black doesn't afford you any privileges or disprivileges, and being white doesn't afford you any privileges, right? Because we are out of that time. It happened in 1994. After 95, it's been 20 years. Get over it. Like, right? It's some people who harbor that mentality. It's really a form of white supremacy, because what that tells me is that you think that Black people find themselves where they are because they are incapable. They are lazy. They can't work. They can't think for themselves. They can't start up business. They are just incapable. They don't function at the level you are functioning at, because you were able, out of your own doing, you've been able to amass wealth. You've been able to amass station and status, and you are where you are solely based on your work. And so therefore, because you are there where you are solely on your work, everyone else who is at a different place than you is there because of their own doing. And so that also in itself is a form of supremacy that you place yourself on, you know? So yeah, tirade done, rant over.
You had a lot on your heart, Nehemiah.
Yeah, you had a lot to kind of like let go. There was a lot to let go of. I do like what you had to say in terms of the inherited system, and that's the critical thing. That is, whose narrative are we? I put it down here. Who creates the narrative that we will either work against or fulfill?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that really gets me about these riots that are happening right now, because on the one hand, you get like the sense that we kind of, and again, this comes back to the whole sort of the space of Africa, constantly looking at, like, you know, leadership, failed government, so forth. And it's almost like expected. You see hordes of Black people running through the streets, catching, you know, carrying big TVs, and grannies carrying mattresses on their heads, walking at 2 a.m. or whatever it was that happened in Durban. And you kind of go like, yeah, that's Black people just doing the thing they do, you know, and you have that sort of that weird narrative, which goes right back to the 1700s, you know, when Bloomberg and Linnaeus were trying to classify the 4 traits of humanity, or the 4 groupings. And there would have been, you know, like Black Africans are lazy, or you can't trust them, or something like that. I don't know. We're fulfilling something, and that's what really works. I get tired of trying to buck against the inherited system. Oh.
Can I just add, Vulindlela, in terms of that imagery, I mean, the riots that I remember with looting are the London riots of some time ago, where people were carrying away big TVs and that kind of stuff. And I don't know if you've seen the England Italy game in terms of Leicester Square, what was taking place in Leicester Square. You know, so I mean, there was a lot of violence and public sort of looting and throwing bottles and pure hooliganism that was taking place there. You know, so and I was almost grateful for that. You know, in the sense that it just showed that this is a human condition, not a you know, that there wasn't a racial element to it. You know, it's that people were opportunistic in that moment, and that all of us in the world are going through this pandemic, and maybe this is just this is one of the ways in which we're blowing off steam. You know, is that we, whether it be a man that we don't know or a team that we don't actually you know, we vaguely kind of support, that's enough excuse for us just to let rip. But, you know, I mean, the one thing I wanted to just come back to in terms of this violence is this idea that it's an ethnic violence in the sense that it's Zulu violence, you know, and I'm fascinated by the Zulu history, is that the Zulu nation as a nation only really came into being post the arrival of white people, you know, and it might have been a very it might have been a response to that environment that the Zulu nation arose, you know. So in terms of that geographic area, there were a multitude of small tribes that existed, and Shaka is the one that then brought them all together, you know. And there's that theory that Shaka was responding to the slave trade in Maputo, I think it was, Lorenzo Marx at the time, you know, so that he had, and that's what drew this thing into a Zulu nation. But if you look at the Zulu nation, it's a very young creation, and you know, the ethnic depth to it isn't something like the Xhosa people necessarily, or the, you know, whatever you're looking at, you know, and to you know, and I wonder whether this is a created thing in our own minds, that and a necessary creation. Is it a necessary creation to belong to an ethnic tribe? You know, is that how we get our belonging? Do we, you know, and I say that as a white English South African who's I've never felt part of a folk, you know. So I mean, half of my family is Afrikaans, and consider themselves Afrikaners. I've never felt that need. I've never, you know, but that comes potentially from a position of privilege, in the sense that I've never had to feel part of any group. I am the standard on which the system is based, you know. So I automatically fit. I feel as if I fit. I don't need a group to which to belong to, because I'm the standard on which this system, the dominant system, is based, you know. So I mean,
that's whiteness. That's whiteness. That's how whiteness works.
No, but it's exactly that, you know. It's and you're not. I wasn't aware of that growing up, you know. It was just, this is the norm, you know. And it's only in meeting Black people and getting to know Black people, and then seeing how things are different, that you then start questioning your own stuff, you know. And then you know, at a point you're horrified by what has transpired, you know. I mean, it's just, yeah. But
I'm talking too much, but I want to ask a question.
I want Danai to say something.
I want Danai to say something as well.
Say anything?
I'm listening and thinking. I mean, I've been reflecting on myself, reflecting on some of the points Nehemiah touched on, and also just going back to what's currently happening, how I personally, as Danai, a Black woman, born in Zim, raised in South Africa, how I see what is going on. As Nehemiah was talking, I was like, okay, I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that. And so has my response to what is going on been influenced by, you know, the environment in which I find myself, or is it an informed response? Is it a response based on the culture or the tribe that I identified with? Is it a response based on my upbringing? Is it a response based on my level of whiteness and my ability to assimilate? Is it, you know, what has the basis of my response to what is happening? What is that basis? And so, yeah, as I'm happy to listen right now. But it's something that I have been thinking about a lot. What is the basis of my response to what's happening currently? Because I mean, there are things that have affected me a great deal. There are things that have made me very angry. There are things that have made me very despondent. There are things that have made me there's a lot of my response has just been quite negative. And so just trying to wrap my hand around why my response has been so negative, why I feel the way I feel, and what the basis of that is. So, yeah.
I wanted to respond to Gary's question, Vuli, just before you ask your question, if you may, please. You know, Gary, I've been thinking about this, also about tribalism, and I think it is a privilege to belong to a tribe, but now I say that because I don't belong to one. Whereas I've spoken to people who will say that, you know, because I'm classified as belonging to some sort of tribe, like a Zulu or Tswana or Xhosa, I feel that I can't escape it. I can't shake it off. And it's defined me, and it's not something that I have chosen for myself. So I do think it's a double-edged sword, but it's definitely an advantage to belong to a tribe which has got some sort of prestige or notoriety about it. And this is what the Zulu tribe does have in South Africa. And we saw this with the passing of their monarch recently, the unification, the sort of phenomenon about it's a nation in mourning, the fact that it's the biggest ethnic tribe in Southern Africa, the fact that there's this long history of being involved in military battles with the colonial powers and being victorious against them also. And then you've got this idea again of that sort of kingship type of quality, where because they've got a monarch, what Jacob Zuma himself did was to model himself as the revolutionary monarch, you see. And even if you observe his home, his estate in Kandla, his throne chair in his home that he sits upon, where his attendants come to consult with him at. These are the sorts of things which we've also inherited from the colonial powers, which we mimic to think this is something worthwhile and worth clinging to. Because the European ethnicity, as Vuli was describing it, they homogenized it, whiteness and Europeanness into one thing, which is why even during apartheid, we saw some signs saying non-Europeans, you see. So we are grappling as Africans with the fact that tribalism is real. It was here before the colonizer arrived on the continent. And it's got good and bad elements to it. And when you see a mob mentality at play, tribalism is definitely at play there, you see. And also people want to understand humanistically, why can't I have this? If it's there and I need it, and I'm so desperate and it's staring me in the face behind a glass door, why can't we get it? And because of, as Nehemiah was saying, our own unique lived experience, because if you've got it, you don't think anymore about it already. But when you don't have it, it haunts you to see it there in front of you. And that's the remnants of poverty. So poverty has also got a huge influence in terms of how we see race and politics. Go ahead, Willie. I'm sorry for that.
No, I'm taking notes. I think that you're raising some thoughts in me that there's almost like we know that this is a wicked problem. You know, race is a wicked problem. And it's like you can't pull. This is where the complexity thing comes into. We can't pull that thread out on race without pulling knots of all these other threads, which are things like tribalism, poverty, politics, and so forth. So my question, I think, after listening to Danai and to Glenn, or like our thoughts on responses to what is happening. Okay, so, and I'm going to be quite glib here. Dee and I have this kind of like a sort of running gag accenty thing that we do. I'm not going to do it for the camera just
You
yet.
have to.
No, I can't. No. It's not okay. So
Don't do it. Don't do it.
no, but so the one thing about it is that when we, I think maybe I can reference why we do that, is because it's kind of it. And I'm going to I'm thinking about it now. It's protecting us from kind of the self-criticism that we might have to go through in engaging with what we see going wrong. For instance, if I were to comment on the thing that's happening now, I'd be like, oh, I'm so close to doing it. Being able to criticize through that lens, that sense of like, I need to take on a certain type of persona to talk about what's happening over there, protects me from a kind of self-criticism and a self-alienation in some ways. So how I can put this simpler is, should I feel, how is it that I feel compromised in my own sense of being? If I can look at what's going on and go, and this is where Dee was talking about it, I look at this and I go, this is not a good example of human behavior. It's also not a good example of Black people. And therefore I'm looking at this and take the politics into it as well. It's like, speak Zulu Nation, speak ANC, whatever it is. And you go like, I don't want to be affiliated with that. So therefore they are not my kin. Mm-hmm. But then how do I separate myself and say, this is wrong, when the majority of the people look like me? And there's a kind of a social contract built up on the inheritance of a system that says you're born to behave that way. You come from a space in which you're expected to fail that way. So there is a similarity in some ways with, you know, the hooliganism and the human element of what's going on, Gary. I do understand that. But there's something desperately wrong when we see Black people running amok. It's desperately terrible. And finding the voice to criticize it aligns you to, it's actually becoming quite painful. It aligns you to being branded someone who's not with the cause. You're not with the system. You're not a mate and all the rest of it, or you're not part of the kid. And that really irks me. That really gets me mad, because if I see people doing shit and they're Black people doing shit, I'm going to say, those are Black people doing shit. But I can't do that without, for myself, feeling like, I can say it, but I'm not going to say it to everybody so that they don't see me. You know, or I'm not going to say it, I'll say it in a nice place like this, because we're you know, there's that kind of inheritance of privilege in terms of education. We're having an educational and academic and critical conversation here. But if I was to walk down the street and say, you know, guys, woman, clean up your shit, really, you know, Black people shouldn't do this. Why, you know? And then I'd be like, oh, but you're a white one now. You live in the suburbs. And then just to kind of tail end, I mean, I had this criticism today. I was teaching the race and representation lectures that I teach to my second years, and I was speaking. And obviously this is online and we don't see each other's faces sometimes. I mean, I put my camera on every now and again, but this one student whose face I didn't see, she says, a young Black woman, she goes, okay, Prof, we hear you talking about all these issues around race, but I hear you with your educated voice and your very well-spoken English accent, and how have you ever experienced race in terms of what it is? And this is a second year, challenging me. I was like, wow, okay, let me tell you what I've experienced. And it was weird because it wasn't that she was asking out of spite, but for her, I had to prove myself that I've gone through the experience of some recognizable affiliation. And after that, oh, thank you, Prof, that's great. I was kin, you know? And so there's an aspect to that whole you didn't use the word, Glenn, but where I start to think about there's pros and cons to it being part of a group, call me something, maybe this is the Fanonian craziness, the sort of schizophrenia. Am I tainted by Western philosophical thinking by saying that I want to be an existentialist? I am an existentialist. I believe in myself as an individual before I want to become a part of a group. And so when you start talking tribe and kin, I start going Ubuntu, red flag, ooh, 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 ooh. You know, I'm like, I'm not going to fully identify with it because it doesn't make sense to me when Ubuntu's people is kind of what we're seeing today. Everyone's out. Are those people, and I want to say this very carefully, are those people feeling more solidarity in that mobness and in the fact that there's a kinship and we're all of alike and we're all of a whatever? So I think I'll stop there because I don't want to get too in my head about it. But it's really troubling. It's actually really fucked up. Excuse my language, sorry. You might have to bleep these things out, honestly.
Can I possibly come in there? You know what Vuli and Danai is highlighting is so important as a Black person who's kind of navigating the sphere of now having accumulated some sort of commodity in the system, right? Because we've kind of established, I think Danai made that beautiful correlation between how racism is in the form of capital now, and your friends, your mother's friends will say to her that you white, you're not really Black, right? And so we inherit whiteness is commodified now, right? So anyone can attain in specific spaces that same whiteness which affords privilege, you know? So you will get into a system where friends of yours or people of yours will be very comfortable to perpetrate race against other people who are of color because you no longer fit the stereotype or systematic what it means to be a person of color, right? Because you and it's none of your fault, right? I think there's a guilt here because you feel somehow that it's your doing and that it's your fault. But in actuality, you are a product of a system, right? You are a product of a system, and whatever was put into you to get into this stage where you are at, it's going to come forth in what you do, right? I myself, just a few months ago, had to grapple with a friend of mine who, quite frankly, like confronted me and said that I don't agree with what you're saying about students striking because you don't understand it. You are not there. You are a lecturer now. You are lecturing. You have scholarships. You don't have to worry about funding. You're doing your PhD. You just don't understand. You don't have an in the conversation. So therefore, your contribution comes from a place of privilege, and you won't understand what we are doing, right? So I was at that where I was like to my friend, because I felt very comfortable. This is my best friend. I felt very comfortable, and I was like, but I don't understand it. Why must they close the university all the time and all of this? And so all of this frustration was bubbling up. And he was like to me, but have you ever thought about it in this way? Have you ever thought about it that these protests that you are seeing are not happening because Black people want to Black? You know, they want to act up. It's just in their nature to be violent, to do as they do. It's just as they are, as we have prescribed them to be. And so they are just acting out what they are, right? And think of it in the terms of that is a reaction to a system. A protest should be seen as it's a reaction to something. It's not something, a protest just doesn't stem up by its own. People just don't decide, okay, I feel like a new flat screen, what can we protest, right? It's none of that, you know? It's caused by something. And so when we look at that now, how do we enter this conversation? How do we think about around criticizing something of that nature? Because obviously now I've been told by my friend that I don't have an in into this. I'm privileged, and so therefore I wouldn't understand the experience of that student and know what drives that student to go at 2 a.m. to burn a tire and to stand and to be shot by bullets and stuff. I am not at that tipping point, so I won't understand, right? And what to me has come out clear is really that when you are going to engage in this, that intent matters, right? What you're trying, when you are criticizing the system, that I've used this term before, good faith, bad faith. How is the approach to this critique? If the approach to critique is that, yeah, blacks were black because they are black, you see that thing that I said and blah, 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 that's not good faith. That's not good faith. That's perpetuating a system that is the cause of what is currently happening. But stepping back and saying, we should evaluate this, we should assess, we should see what is causing this, and we should see how we can think together around alleviating it. Because at the same, like Gary was saying about people are being texted and stuff like that, and some people have come online and have been saying that it's so funny how we are being called to arms now. Zulu Nation, come forth. Don't let this oppression stand. But when the tenders are being given out, you are not being called for. When the business opportunities are there, you are not being called out, you know? And so you realize that these people themselves that are doing this are responding to a call from a system that is inherently corrupt, right? And so are they the problem? You know, you need to start to ask this question: are you a problem when you are acting out of a necessity or a need or a reality that has been posed to you? How do we then grapple with that? What is the problem? But then there's also the issue of agency, right? And personhood and personal agency that maybe I've developed and that Vuli has, where he wants to step back and say, but that's not how we should act, right? Because we have that agency and that personhood, and we've developed that concept for us now where we live between what is right and wrong, right? Outside of that concept and outside of that context and outside of that. And so I really think that different instruments possibly of thinking around these things need to be employed. And really, we need to really stop when we speak about it, only highlight the result of it and not speak about the cause of it. There's a cause here. A president embezzled money and is inciting a nation of people to riot, right? And we need to speak about that. We need to address that. What is he doing to cause this? And how can he do better? Because a statesman, as a former statesman, as someone who cares about the people, he's supposed to go out there and say to the people, calm down. Let's let the law take its course. Let's not react this way. But he's not doing that. Instead, we are talking about Mam Dwaga with a bed at 2 a.m. in the street, running around with a TV underneath her arm. She's a result. There's someone else here. There's a person these people are striking for that is mute, that is quiet, that is not saying anything. And so our focus should be to the causes of these riots instead of the results and the effects of them. I just think sometimes we miss the mark as people when we talk about these things in that way, you know?
Do you think media will allow us to do that? Sorry, so I'm just going to ask you. I hear you, I completely hear you. Look at the cause, not the result. But we're not seeing enough engagement in the public forum, in the public space to say, and within the governmental space. Mm-hmm. Why are we not hearing Cyril say, hey, whoa, people, let's deal with this way, instead of, I'm going to call the army, you know? Mm-hmm. Sorry, Dee, I cut you off.
Yeah, I was just, thank you, Nehemiah. I actually wanted to just touch on what you said with regard to how your friend views you now, in terms of you being in the space of being the lecturer and being in a position of privilege. And it just made me think about conversations with my students specifically with what I teach. And my whole purpose, I feel, is just to not necessarily to get you to cram this information into your head, but to get you to think differently. And how can I do that if you don't even see me as someone who is part of the cause, who understands what's happening, who is on the ground with all the other people? If you don't even see me as that person from the get-go, how can I get you to be able to try and think about a specific situation in a different way? Yes, I may have to justify, like Vuli did, may have to justify myself in my understanding of what's happening and the situation and my experience. But if already you don't see me as being a part of that particular, being in kinship with you, how are we able to then start to think differently? And I totally agree, like, you know, we need to focus on the cause. We need to focus on the fact that Jay-Z is sitting in isolation, in jail, and people are burning things to the ground for him. And he is not in any shape or form trying to quell that. He's perfectly fine with the fact that the people that he embezzled money from, the people that have suffered because of his embezzling, are the ones that are going out onto the street to fight for him, are the ones losing their lives, are the ones, you know, being injured, being arrested, having all of these negative experiences. But he's just gonna sit there and be like, okay, cool, we'll let the country burn until I get released. And so like Willie said, and like you're saying, why is that not the conversation? Why is the media only focusing on the fact that, what is the mall? The mall in Pietermaritzburg is on fire. This morning was on fire. Why is the media focusing on the fact that, you know, now the army has been deployed, which is a whole nother issue. And, you know, all of these things, focusing on the result. Why is there no focus? Why is there no discussion on what led to this point? What got us to the point where things are burning, things are being looted, businesses are going to shut down, and people are going to become unemployed because of all the destruction? Why are we not talking about that? Why is that not our focus? And then the last thing, just a question, which when you were talking about, you know, what your friend said about the fact that, you know, what's happening, the protest is a reaction to the system. And something that popped into my head was, why is the protest the reaction? Why is the reaction violent, burning tires? Yes, a protest is important. I completely agree that, you know, sometimes you need to fight against the system. But why is it that the reaction is always a violent one? Why is there always, at the end of the day, destruction of property, loss of life, people being thrown in jail, people being injured? Why is that always the action in the reaction? Yeah.
You know, something important that we're also missing in this conversation is how novel the situation is. This is an ex-statement of a democratic state that was actively pursued by the law against his engagement in it or out of it. We are seeing in America now currently how it is so difficult for them to prosecute a Donald Trump under the law, just based on the fact that he's also a ex-statesman. right? And so when we also look at that, we can't forget that, right? And that's where maybe some of the political connotations might be coming in, where Cyril Ramaphosa is not speaking on the issue, where he's not including that in his State of the Nation address on how the things are in the country and stuff. Those are the considerations that are being made politically. And so that's why the news is trying to divert our attention, and we are always focusing now on these people running around in the street and burning down things, when the real focus should be, what is the presidency doing? The presidency has now deployed the army to go and quell things, and we do know how policing and force this ends. It's not going to end well. It's going to end in violence. And I think the answer really to I don't know in this case, Danai. I really don't know why always a protest and violence is the question, but it seems to have become generic for the little man in the system, that when they want to be heard, they resort to such actions. And different movements and stuff has highlighted that when they approach the system in the proper manner, they get shot down. They get put in all of this paperwork that says you must do ABC in order to do ADC. And by the time they get to the finish line, the goalpost is all of a sudden changed. No, you have to get this, that. And I think many a times, I'm not sure in this instance, but many a times that protest and that violence come from a place of frustration. And it's pretty clear that when the leaders of those movements get on TV and they're like, we are tired of this, you know, it's always that. The line is always, we are tired of this treatment. And yeah, like it's just that somehow since the Renaissance, since the Renaissance, if you look at Western history, we have just associated change and evolution with a drastic act of violence. A drastic act of violence has to transpire for change to emanate from that system. But half of the time we see that when these things happen, we always it always just ends there. The violence and the energy ends there with cutting off Marie Antoinette's head, or it ends where Hugo Chavez steps into power. You know, it ends there. There's nothing that moves from there. There's no one that the energy is done now. No one's interested in systematic change. No one's interested in talking, how are we going to change the system now that we finally get there? People are burnt out. Mandela clearly said in London at the 46664 concert, the generation after, it's time to take it. It is in your hands. And isn't it such a dark outlook? As if we are tired now. We are done, we are spent. You need to take over the baton now, and you need to create systematic change. And it's daunting. It's daunting because half of the time it requires for a quelling of things as we know it, and trying to build and to move from there. And it seems like no one has the energy there. But we all have the energy for anger and for violence, but for productive change, for systematic change. The first thing when we have conversations about change, people are going to tell you is, I've been talking since 94. I've been at this university since this and this and this, and nothing has happened. So I don't even know why I came today, but I came anyhow, and I'm going to leave here today and nothing's going to have been done. And you all are not going to do nothing. And I find it so like, I find it so, it's so disheartening when you enter space, and there's always going to be that 5-2 people that always are the veterans that are tired. And I just want to ask once, like, who asked you to be here? Who forced you this morning to come? You could have stayed at home. You could have stayed at home. No one asked you. No one's forcing you to be here, you know? And so really, Danai, I think, like, besides my comedic efforts, because I realize I do a lot of comedy sometimes to bring across serious issues. I mean, I apologize if that offends anyone. But I do realize that sometimes there is so much anger and energy for the violence. However, when we immerse from the violence, there's no one to really want to engage and speak about how structurally and systematically we can contribute to moving in a more equitable way forward, you know?
Yeah, that's true. I'm thinking now about the taxi strike that we had a little while back, and the reason for the strike and how it was dealt with. And it was eventually kind of brought down by, you know, former Mayor Faku coming in and yelling at them and telling them this is not how you're supposed to handle things. You need to calm down. And, you know, kind of being the voice of reason and telling them, well, you're causing a city to suffer for an issue that needs to be dealt with 5 people, the 5 people that are responsible for stealing the money that has brought up this issue. And so, that'll always be my question, I guess. Why does it always tend to descend to violence? But yeah, thank you for that.
There is this thing of, you know, like, and I'm coming back to Gary's earlier statement of like, when we see hordes of people running amok, and you pointed out rightfully so that this is a human thing. But again, coming back to, you can't pull the thread of the issue of race without making knots with everything else. And what I was kind of listening to you, Dee, you know, it was weird. I don't mean to kind of be insulting or anything, but it was like, I started to hear, why do they have to keep burning things? You know, so even in that rhetoric, I think there is that kind of sense of like the projection that comes into that, which is like, why are they burning things? Well, what's going on over there? Why are they doing that? Why must it always come down to da 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 da? And I think that there's a very sort of tenuous space of choosing not to identify with them, choosing not to, and saying that's over there. Why must that thing happen? So there's that space of the student who doesn't see you as kin because you've ascended, and then you will also find yourself speaking from a point of ascension, saying, but what? Excuse me if I'm wrong about that, but a point of difference or deference, and saying that's over there. You know, why must it always come down to destruction? And Emma is right. It's always the little man, the little person who ends up burning things down and all the rest of it. But the little people sometimes can do things right. Look at the hobbits. The hobbits didn't burn down the Shire because things were bad. There's a kind of there's an element of you know, we're not living in an idyllic Shire place or whatever it is, but if it is the little man, if it is that sort of like person who has some, why do we go to violence? Maybe because there's no other way. Maybe that's part of the system. Blow it up and build it up again somehow. Glenn's been very quiet today.
You know, I was just reflecting on what was sort of a golden thread to this conversation for me, which is something which I fully agree with you, Willie. We'll speak about this next week. I was going to do a little bit of a short blurb on negrophobia also and negrophilia in preparation for the conversation about sexuality, but we're going to do that as our topic for next time, Gary, because you triggered something here today, as Willie and I were saying. But, you know, we've sometimes got this idea that you've got to reject your own kin in the pursuit of self-preservation. So I'm also grappling with this, even though I'm not the one looting the store and grabbing a television or groceries off of the shelf into my arms and running for dear life, I'm still facing the same problem as a Black academic, where I have got the scenario of people thinking this Black man is destructive, you see? And why are people being destructive like myself? I will say that's what I'm doing. It's akin to what's happening with the person looting in the store there. Why am I doing it in my work, in my career, in the academy, where I find a sense of belonging? Because it's not working. And so when you go and if you apply that logic to when you observe the looting, you look at it through, these are people saying it's not working. Then you start to make better sense out of it and try to understand why this was the best method for them to just release their frustration, to show we don't think this system works in our favor. So this is a brief moment which the universe has afforded us to show who it is, who we find as our oppressor, that, yeah, in your face, we can do this to you because we can. This is the only power that we've got. So when Ramaphosa comes on the TV like he did last night to say, you're doing destruction to our economy, we're not going to get investment, we're going to be downgraded with ratings and so forth, he's absolutely right. But on the other hand, that actually plays into the hand of the one who wants to be destructive, deliberately so. You must remember it's deliberate also, that I have the power to do this. And part of the reason why you take it seriously or not so seriously is rooted in my blackness also. So I just wanted to acknowledge that even though we are able to point our finger and say, but it's those black people, not me, we mustn't negate the fact that even as elevated or ascended people of color, we have still got these problems which we are having to negotiate. And this, coming back to the whole complex of stereotype threat, which was aired, because we know it's a stereotype that exists about our kin out there. We've rejected ourselves and removed ourselves from it, yet it keeps cropping up even in this new type of journey which we've chosen for ourselves, that you have the potential to destroy what we have created for ourselves by trying to come and take it for you. And this is why education is the huge conundrum that it is in South Africa, because you've still got this mentality of a whole number of privileged white people in this country thinking, because the education system was taken over by people of color in South Africa, my dear darling child is getting the worst possible education they could possibly get. And God forbid, they've got a whole slew of only black lecturers. Now, unfortunately, it would be, for some people, what a fantastic thing if that could happen, because it would reflect the demographics of the nation. And others would say, gosh, I've got to immigrate immediately. And I know people who have done that.
No, that's so true, Glenn. I think that what you're saying about, and something rings true in what you're saying, that these people are highlighting a power, they are highlighting a problem. They're saying there's a problem here and this isn't working. What we seem to forget sometimes is also that the people who are running the government that are supposed to be giving back to us are elected officials. They are elected representatives of the people. So when the people are unhappy with the people that they are putting in power, they have a right. They have a right to show their discontent with the people they have elected to lead, right? And so maybe of our disposition or our position in society, we don't feel the neglect of the people in power so much, because we, yet again, coming back to that point of, we have our own agency, we have our own personhood, we are able to provide for ourselves in the system, we are able to navigate the system. But people who are reliant on a government that they are elected to lead them, the government has a responsibility towards those people. And the elected official of the country, the president and stuff, is not above us. He's just the main person we have chosen to lead us, to stand for us. The person we said we trust to make informed decision for us to be able to move better forward as a country, right? The country is run based on our taxes. We pay tax money. So if we are unhappy with the leadership in there, we have to have avenues to show that displeasure. Right? And I don't think in any democratic system in the world, those avenues exist, because our politicians everywhere have become glorified tyrants who can just decide that they don't want to respond to your question. They just can decide they don't want to engage you, and they just can walk off, right? And continue business as usual. And they seem to forget that the system of democracy is built upon an elected by the people to forward their best interest because they pay money into the system. Every time we buy an item, they tax us 12% VAT on that item, and that is money that goes into the running of the country. We are investing in this country. So therefore, we have a vested interest in what the country does. And so the government has to be accountable to us. They have to be accountable to us. Now, it's easy for me to write an email or to, as I was seeing when churches were fighting to be hateful. Remember this new bill on hate speech, and churches were fighting for their right to hate from the pulpit, right? They were fighting to be hateful, right? Which is so anti-Christianity. I don't even know what Christianity they are ascribing to anymore, that they would fight to spew hate speech. But when we saw that happening, we realized that there were avenues. We were told, go to this forum and write. There's a template already for you. Just fill in your name and your address and send it through, and it's going to be gazetted and you will be heard. They will have no, if we get a certain amount of letters that go through, they will not be allowed to pass this bill. But yet with service delivery, we don't have avenues like that. We don't have people at the grassroots level mobilizing, saying that we should come against this bill, we should do this, we have to fight for equitable change for people that are disenfranchised. We don't see that. We don't see that. And so those people have no other resort but to resort to violence. That's the only language they have been taught. They've been taught it by the Nkandla, the freedom fighting party. What was it? In the middle of apartheid, when it was the militia.
Yes, Freedom Party, yeah.
Freedom, they were taught that carry arms against a system that is disenfranchising you. And no one after that came back and said, but here are other channels that we can use. We can actually get, if we get so many signatures, then the government is forced to respond in this way, right? We don't educate our people about their rights and how they can operate in their system for change for them. And so therefore, when people are pushed in a corner, we are going to get this violent response every single time, right?
So can I just jump in here and just say, for most of my professional life, I've worked with crowds and mobs and stood between police and people in all forms of agency. And it is a universal thing. It's not a black thing or a white thing. It is very much a universal thing. And Danai, I want to challenge you. It's not every time. It doesn't happen every time. But the times that it does happen, it stands out for us because of the nature of the violence that takes place, and because it's so radical for us. But you know, I mean, if you know, so, and I was on Twitter today just saying to people, you've got to, you know, in 1952 we had massive riots in our city. None of us were there at the time, you know, but in 1990 our city nearly came to a complete halt. I mean, Glenn probably has family that was involved in that. If you weren't, Glenn, involved in it yourself in 1990, you know, and then in 2008 and 2015, there was large xenophobic attacks that happened across the, so there was that whole Durban Street, I don't know if anyone remembers the whole Durban Street riots that took place, which focused on Eastern people and Indian people. And there was a lot of attacks that took place. Some of those buildings still haven't been rehabilitated, you know, so it's not every time, but it is a constant thread that runs through our society and has from time immemorial. We are a violent society. If you look at murder, if you look at assault, if you look at how we treat our children, how we treat our women, that thread of violence runs continuously through, and it's because it's successful, because it does something for us. And I think it goes to Nehemiah's point, is that it's an outflow of agency. I can grab that TV and I'm doing something, you know, but the other routes that exist are longer term stuff. So Nehemiah, I mean, there are ways. I represent a political party that's trying to do exactly what you're saying should be happening at a local level, you know. And the interesting thing was that I've been going around the city documenting just the collapse of services. And the other day, the mayor tweeted a thing where he showed the municipality cleaning up a suburb somewhere, cutting the grass, sweeping the streets, and that kind of stuff. And I tweeted back at him, and I used all the images that I've now collected throughout the city. And I said, when these images look like your images, then we can say that we're making progress in the city. You know, and I've documented it now. It's not in the suburbs, it's in the townships and the northern areas where you have rubbish on the streets, you have sewage running down the street. You know, there's a house in Uitenhage where there's sewage running through the house, where the pigs are feeding in the tributary that the sewage pumps out into, you know, and there's just plastic everywhere. And the mayor's response to me was twofold. The first was that I'm being negative, I should be positive. And the other one was to say, but that's how we grew up in the township, is that we were taught just to throw things. And I was gobsmacked. I was like, how do you, I mean, you know, you bought into the whiteness thing. I mean, you know, you have bought, you know, because I remember as a kid, so I don't know if any of you remember Zip It in a Zibby Blik, which was, so it was a South African thing that happened in the 70s. Because we had a litter problem in the country, and they brought up this campaign, you know, and a lot of white people forget that we were taught that littering was bad, but we were taught that back in the 70s. Now we're able to stand back. So, and I saw Steenhuisen, there's a clip on Steenhuisen in terms of responding to this violence, that, you know, they should have gone in earlier, the army should have gone in earlier and restore law and order, you know, and you just want to go, John, you know, really, you know, that's your little world is being disrupted, and that's, you know, let's restore that neat and tidy world of yours. I mean, you know, and it was, you know, so I think the violence is important for us to recognize, but it's not the only thing we should recognize. And I think we have to be very careful that we use it as a universal paintbrush to paint everything, because the majority of poor people are not rioting. The majority of poor people are not stealing stuff from stores, but there are opportunists to doing this, and there is criminal elements behind it. And there's this ethnic thing, you know. So I mean, the ethnic thing is that Zuma campaign is deliberately stoking these fires so that they can then have a political solution, you know, so that they can step outside of the legal framework, they can step outside of everything else, and they can then have a political thing where the ANC says, okay, like for peace, and because that's what happened with de Klerk. I mean, de Klerk and and someone was mentioning it too, that the deal that Zuma ironically did with all the ex-state agency guys to protect them is he didn't prosecute them, you know, but they should have been prosecuted. I mean, I know for a fact of white people who live in the city who did some atrocious things that were never followed through on, you know. Why? You know, you go and chat to all those TRC researchers, and they just shake their heads, you know. I mean, there's a lady that's still uncovering bodies, you know, that is still finding bodies and matching families to bodies, you know. And I think, yeah, you know, I mean, it comes back to the question, is how do we, you know, maybe that's your question, Nehemiah, is how do we engage with this complexity? Where's the starting point?
I wanted to come in, Gary, if I may, because you've said something which really was affecting me quite a lot in my own personal life lately, which was I've also come to realize, like you, perhaps what triggers your heightened awareness of why you are a racist, you see? And for me, it came back to this point about the litter, as you were speaking about the litter problem in this area. And I'm very privileged. I've got a beautiful home in Summerstrand. I am an academic. You know, I'm doing quite well. I've done the whole social mobility thing. So I know it's a privilege to live in a beautiful suburb. But when the mayor says things like we grew up with rubbish, and so and you think it's a general, how can this man say this? On the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, pay deep attention to what he says, because there's an element of truth to it. And I wanted to say, not that by generalizing and saying no, Black people are fine with littering, but they've developed a higher tolerance for just not being bothered by it around them. You see, and I've picked this up with living in a section of Summerstrand where a lot of students, for example, are living in communes around me. And I had to speak to the students to say, what are you guys up to? Are you totally fine with all of the rubbish laying outside of the house here? The guys came to scratch through the garbage over the night, of course, before the dirt truck came to collect it. And you just see a whole bunch of things. Why is nobody cleaning it up? Day after day, I've walked by with my dog and nobody's picked it up. And the other situation you've got is the students just throwing their empty liquor bottles everywhere. I had to recognize to myself, this is a moment for me saying, these Black students coming out of the township, coming to destroy a beautiful suburb because they have not yet comprehended cognitively that this is not appropriate, it's not acceptable, it's not good for the planet, it's not good for themselves. And then reflecting on the question, why would they not want to pick up this garbage laying right out front of their house? And why do they think it's fine for them to throw their bottles on my lawn as they walk by? That's where I then started to say, this must mean they're not troubled by it the way I'm troubled by it, you see? So it goes back to just trying to look at, again, the privilege which we've had even in, so education transcends just what happens in the academy and in the schools. But you have to alter people's minds and in how we respond to these situations. I thought to myself, well, you're a privileged racist acting out now, but don't stop correcting the students also, you see? So it was a difficult thing for me to wrestle with, but I do understand where, as you heard the mayor saying to you, but you're only looking at the negative aspect of it. I do see both sides of the coin. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah,
I left you all
again,
stubborn.
No, I wanted to. Sorry, sorry, no, I'm just going to jump in for you. Hey, so like, if I think to Glenn, what you just said about, you know, the litter and the rest of it, there's we're framing this conversation around sort of a human aspect, inherited systems, and in some ways imposed readings of people's behavior based on what they might look like or what they might not look like. And at the same time, like maybe this comes from poor governance and all the rest of it. Are we as worried about students who might have come from a background where maybe it wasn't necessary to pick up the trash all the time, or maybe service delivery wasn't okay, and there's a kind of a higher tolerance, as you put it? Are we as bothered by them as we would be by a bunch of white students running amok through center of town, or doing strange things on the beach and having like a crazy party, you know, drunk white party or drunk colored party or and all the rest of it? Is there a kind of a difference in reading? Does it all boil down to human behavior, or are they laced with the lenses of race in that? Because I remember being in Stellenbosch and thinking to myself, my God, these white people are annoying. And I really hated it. It was like, I just saw white people having drunken party after party. And I said, someone's given them license to do that. And at the same time, someone's giving people license to litter, to not have to worry about where the trash is going to go. You get the license to do it because you're kind of given the sense of, yeah, that's how we grew up. That's what we've got. I'm sorry, that's what we have. We've got plastic in the fields. That's what we grew up with. I'm going to do it here when I move into the suburbs as well. It's fine. It's part of who we are. It's part of who we are as kind of big families, loud, whatever. It's part of who we are. Sorry,
no. I think maybe to answer your question and Glenn's question and Nehemiah's is that where do you start with this thing? Is that you have to see it. Your students that are throwing those bottles down don't see it. I mean, I recall my student days, students doing exactly the same thing, and those were white students. I mean, that came from the privileged homes and that kind of stuff. But they didn't see it themselves. And I agree with you that the mayor is reflecting upon an experience of his in terms of the upbringing that's accurate in that sense, but it's not accurate in the sense that he generalizes that to township people. That's the way that's unique to township people. That's a human quality, is that we don't see the rubbish. I mean, that's part of, so part of when I saw people looting, the first thought that came through my mind is that, well, actually, these are malls that are being targeted, and malls are actually a very destructive intrusion in communities. They destroy communities. They don't build communities. There's a whole theory around spaza shops and how spaza shops help communities, whereas malls decimate communities. And that so my view wasn't that these are black people carrying away TVs. This is a anti-capitalist thing. But I put on the race lens when I saw there's some white guys and some Indian guys with guns in their hands now protecting a street somewhere in KZN. I don't know where it is, but there then I'm aghast too, and saying, oh my God, excuse my French, but white people, please don't do that. I mean, don't, your guns. I mean, what did you just, did you fly in from America? Please stop that. And I in turn have put on the race lens for that. I don't see black people looting as black people looting. It's just people looting. But white people defending their territory.
That's what it's about, Vuli. We are really trying to understand, why do we come to this thing where we say, gosh, look at these white people, or look at these black people, or even what I love is, what I want to watch, the television program I'd like to see is what Gary's just said. White people, please don't do this. You see, where it's coming from white people. So we would love to get insight into this. This is what the critical race conversation is trying to do ultimately, and why it's been driven by African Americans in the US is because they felt they needed to speak back to the hegemony there in the US, and because they were also getting this. Black people, stop doing this. Stop being poor in the ghettos. Stop speaking like that with your ebonics. Stop being hoes and pimps and doing drug dealing everywhere. And it's permeated across. And then you've got the added problem of black youth across the world imitating what has been glorified in music videos and in action films and Hollywood and so forth. So it's a double-edged sword, and it's a rolling ball which just keeps going. There's no way to stop it. You just got to try and follow it ultimately. But through the hearing of how we all are relating to this based on how we've grown up in a particular type of body or neighborhood or social environment, allows us to then not take it so personally, but so that's why I said, again, tongue in cheek, to hear what is it that white people themselves find troubling about other white people, because we're fully aware as black people how we are how we're troublesome to white folks, because they've even designed political systems to try to counteract it. But very interesting that we're trying to explore the nuance. So that's where I would say to Vuli, there isn't one straight cut clear, or we're doing this or that. We're trying really to look at it through a kaleidoscope actually, and see how this pattern has come together somehow.
That's right. So I want to just respond to that, because some time back we were talking about, the perpetuation of a system of oppression in some ways, and you raise the questions of like ebonics, you raise the question of like the music, then we're sort of straying into the cultural space of things. And I start to think to myself, so you're watching an American sort of show, there might be an African-American family, and if you're not with the colloquialisms, you can be left out in the dark, sort of thing. But then you go and find out what those we go and find out what the colloquialisms are referencing. For instance, one being, to say someone's ratchet, you go like, yeah, it kind of means that you're, if I'm not mistaken, you're kind of like acting in a sort of ghetto, uncouth, sort of way, and you go, but is that a positive thing really to be using within our way of speaking to each other? So it's kind of like in trying to, I suppose one could do the same thing about a gay identity. You reclamation of certain words and identities and titles to go like, yeah, queer or morphe becomes a sort of like a way of understanding that. You got the N word, right, which no white person's allowed to use, but Black people can use it back and forth to one another. So you kind of think to yourself, how are we looking? What does this kaleidoscope mean? Like that we have to look through, because there are positive and negatives in terms of establishing the kinship. And we're coming full circle here. Establishing the kinship through symbols and signs and signifiers and language and so forth. But at the same time, by establishing that, you're perpetuating a boundary. And that for me is kind of where, what happens if you intersect quite a few of those boundaries? What if you're someone, and this is, I'm going to be honest, I find it really difficult to say that, to be aware of that intersectional space, that kind of, I find it difficult to see it, be part of it, and to reflect on it, and then to articulate it at the same time. Because the moment you are seen, they see you. The moment you sort of engage, they see you. And you kind of think to yourself, okay, fine, how do I explain that I have this accent? How do I explain that I'm a gay man? How do I explain that I'm from Zimbabwean? How do I explain that I've got this, and this to Zimkita from Sweden, or to Paulo from wherever? Because there's, yeah, it's a weird space, and I think this is why I kind of like keeping to myself around these things, because it's tough to see that there's an intersection, and yet, and I don't know, is it arrogant to think that some people are just like kind of, there's a multiplicity in the multiplicity and a complexity to people's existence, yes. But sometimes that complexity is broadened by a lot of other things. My complexity is no different to somebody else's complexity, that's what I'm saying. But it's, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Can you help me out? I don't know if I'm making sense. But I think we've had this conversation before.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to articulate it either. I'm not even going to try, but I'm not sure how to articulate it either. It's difficult. I think, like you said, it's trying to navigate all of these different spaces. They will intersect whether you like it or not. But how do you manage that intersection? Should you manage that intersection? Does it help you to manage that intersection? Yeah, I'm not sure how to articulate that.
I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier, is that you have to see it first. You have to see the tapestry. So Glenn, I mean, maybe a question to you would be, is when there's a piece of music that has many instruments playing and other things, how do you experience music in that sense? Do you experience it as the whole, or do you hear the trumpet and the guitar? So for you that's schooled in music, I mean, can you pick out all the different instruments without a problem?
Yes, that's what we call selective listening. And that's what we as humans practice also. You would have heard even sometimes if you grew, when you might have been younger, a teacher or a parent might have said, look at this one, they've got selective hearing. If you refuse to do a chore which they instructed you to do. So you can do that. You can receive, I always tell my students, you can receive the sort of meta structure, the music as a whole, and just be bombarded by what the composer intended as a sort of mass, or you could also do a deep listening of it, which is where you then are able to train your ear to hear, how does this polyphony come together? Where are the voices operating? In which register is this voice happening? In which register is that voice happening? What timbre or color does that instrument have compared to this one? Has this melody been doubled at the octave? Has it been given more volume than the other one? What's giving rhythm? What's giving melody? What's giving harmony? And that's why it's so difficult for us as humans to make sense out of very complex conversations, because it requires us to do selective listening and a deep hearing of where the other person is coming from, and what their experience has done to shape how they see things and how they articulate it also. So if we as even though we are sort of seen by many folks out there as privileged because we're doing PhDs or have done a PhD and we're well read or able to be eloquent and speak well, they are fighting similar battles based, just as we come back to what Nehemiah mentioned, that type of inheritance which they've just been grappled with. So it sort of becomes this thing of what is your lot in life? And I almost wanted to say to Vuli, that's what we're trying to figure out. You're trying to figure out, what is my lot in life? Why am I the person that I am? Who am I? How do I engage with other people? How do I make sense out of it? How do I make sense out of myself? How do I come to accept what I didn't choose in life, which was the home I grew up in, the street where I was, the neighborhood where it was located, the church I went to, the schools I went to, and how have all of those things influenced me? And how do I determine how I can attempt to define myself? To have the agency to say, well, I recognize where I'm coming from, and it's defined me and shaped me and molded me in this particular way until here. And then I've actively, you see, this is what I'm interested in the humanistic sciences, is when does a human take an active decision to change their life? And when you realize, when people who have done that successfully reflect on where they've come from, you understand that almost certainly part of it means disentangling yourself from where you've come from. And you've had to do that, Gary, also as a liberal white middle-aged man, to figure out that I've got to disentangle myself from my environment, my community, my lived experience, and how society shaped me and given me value in relation to other bodies around me. And for us as people of color, it's even harder. That's where I don't mind saying, I could be wrong. So when Vuli says, everybody is complex, I definitely agree with that, yes, but I would say that there are various degrees of complexity. I don't know how to theoretically substantiate that claim, but I feel it in my core, in my intuition, which says that oppressed people's lived experiences are more complex than people who have been privileged.
No, I fully agree with you, Glenn. I find that when you look at it through that lens, you also have to bring it back to that point of I'm struggling to find the right words because I'm afraid to say it the wrong way. But for me, how this process has really worked out to get down to that point of trying to grapple with myself is really allowing for, and I've said this before, allowing for there to be multiple truths about a situation that I'm finding myself in or that I'm challenged with, right? Allowing for that this could be right, but then in the same breath, there could be this other thing that is also right. And these two things don't necessarily need to be combating each other, but there must be a way in which they function together because they exist together in my life, you know? And when we look at oppressed peoples and how they navigate that complexity, when Glenn says that there's degrees of that, I think it really speaks to that there are degrees of oppression, right? If we have to make an example of what degrees of oppression looks like, we can talk about the white feminist movement, right? In how the white feminist movement is largely seen as being an instrument of white supremacy still, right? Because a woman is a feminist because a white woman is a feminist because in that instance, she wants to be at the same level or seen equal as the man in the system. However, she's not able to give up her whiteness. She still wants to take part in her whiteness in that she is a woman, right? Which makes her oppressed. Then similarly, when we look at the black man is oppressed. However, he in himself is still a man. And so he wields certain power in society that a woman doesn't have access to. And then you look at the oppressed black woman, who is both woman and black, and you see how those degrees of oppression play out. Then really, when you look at it in that way, you see that there is value in that person's experience in that system, right? And I think that that complexity is really something you have to grapple with yourself, to ask yourself the question, but maybe all our lived experiences is not the same as Black people. And so therefore, when Black people speak out about oppression, we have to be aware that that person is speaking from their lived experience, and there might be a different person who has a different experience to that completely negates that, or that completely goes in and amplifies that one person has presented, right? And so how do we stand and how do we talk about that and how do we grapple with that? And then obviously there's always the question of, oh, but you are just being caught up in your victimhood, right? When people are like, no one's oppressed anymore, slavery ended 400 years ago, you're just caught up in your oppression, right? You just caught up in your victimhood. You want to victim yourself in the system. And we really need to start to break that down so that people can see that your lived experience of a Black person might not be the same as someone else's lived experience. And so therefore it opens that kind of compassion to when we interact with each other, but also it allows for that point of criticality when you are investigating something or you are looking at something, to be able to look at yourself and to self-reflect and to view on yourself. I think it was important that Glenn said that sometimes as people of color, we tend to think that all the work needs to be done by white people, that my lived experience is enough. Just by virtue of my lived experience, I am right in everything. But you realize that there is some work that you need to do as a Black person. You need to understand the system that you're finding yourself in. You need to be able to unpack that. You need to rationalize things about yourself, about your behavior, why your mother addressed the white man who is her age in a shop as Mr., right? And he was calling her by her first name, right? And so you have to come and you have to unpack those things also for yourself so that you can really enter this conversation and really have a valuable input to forward the conversation or to forward the language around all of this that we are grappling with, you know?
Great, Nehemiah, thank you. Everyone, I realized it's 5:15. We've been at this for a while. Yeah, I mean, I think, Nehemiah, just to respond to you, just to say that it's the same thing as Steenhuisen's bring law and order, please, you know. The victimhood is the same thing, it's a deflection. It's a neat deflection that the white community particularly is very good at in terms of not having to reflect on their own stuff, you know, is that you can, yeah, well, it's Black people looting again, you know, and again, there's that little emphasis on the again, you know, we told you so, we told you in 94 that this is what's going to happen. You see, now there's the evidence of this. And it is this very natural instinctive thing that we do, but it's a deflection tool to prevent us from actually looking at ourselves and saying, how are we part of this, you know? how have we made this happen? You know, Zuma didn't happen in isolation. Zuma was enabled by a whole bunch of white people, you know, and you can't distance yourself from it by saying that. You know, those malls are owned by white people. You know, I mean, you know, yeah. Okay, so if I continue, then we're going to continue for another hour or so. I just wanted to say, everyone, if you're happy, I think that we'll just call it. We call it here. And then just wanted to check with you in terms of availability, when next we do this. We had said we wanted to take a bit of a break. The lockdown kind of interjected somewhat of a break, but you guys are on the academic schedule. 2 weeks from now would not be, isn't what would suit people, huh?
No, I was going to say, let's take a break for a month, Gary, and come back on the 16th.
16th,
Yeah.
The 16th
Of August.
Of August.
Yeah, that's when the semester starts again. So if we can, yeah, just take a break now, because in 2 weeks it's recess is starting for us. So yeah, from the 16th when the semester starts, then we can
Okay, well,
carry on.
We still have a republic by the 16th, you know, but
Yeah.
I'm just living day to day, people. I don't know what to think.
you're gonna find me very, very depressed at that point, because it's more than likely that they will postpone the local government elections, you know.
Yeah,
I just want
this is true.
this damn thing done now, you know, but you know, to keep it going for another 6 months, whatever. So guys, okay, so the 16th, and is 3 or 3:30 a better time for you? Does 3 work nicely?
Yeah, 3 o'clock.
3.
Yeah, 3
Okay.
works.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do it on the 16th again at 3, and I'll send out the link and everything, and just the recording. We'll do that again. Yeah. So again, guys, thank you very much. Please stay safe out there. This COVID thing is not pleasant, and
No, it
the
isn't.
violence thing too is not pleasant either.
Yeah.
Yeah, stay safe, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks
everyone for a good conversation. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.